welcome back here to Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, where sports meets life inside of the Great Lakes Honda City Studios. Great Lakes Honda City on 7140 Henry Clay Boulevard in Liverpool, New York, for new and used vehicles of all different shapes and sizes, and vehicles that I have trusted not only for gas mileage but for safety over the years. Head to greatlakeshondacity.com for more information. Let them know that DT sent you. I'm here picture in picture with Michael Strickland here, the man behind the music of putting together this ACC football schedule and serving as the ACC Senior Associate Commissioner for football is here with me today. So Michael, first and foremost, I'm sure your weather is better than mine, and welcome to the broadcast.
Dan, good morning. Good to be with you today.
Good to be with you as well. And you know what? I gotta give respect to the good to be with you, because I don't know if it's a Southern thing, but John Swofford, who I have a very good relationship with, and the time I spent with him as commissioner, and a very good relationship with Jim Phillips now, Swofford would always end our conversations with saying, "Good to be with you." And it was always such a kind thing. So is that like a North Carolinian thing? What is that?
It might be. I'm also going into my 13th season here, so maybe I'm just the ACC way under both commissioners that you mentioned, both of whom have been terrific mentors personally and professionally for me and so many others here in the office.
Yeah, and we know, kind of going into this and breaking down the ACC football schedule, I do want to congratulate you. I congratulated Jim Phillips and Amy Yacola, but the entire ACC for the extended base rights agreement through 2035-36 for the ACC with all of your schools and with ESPN. So congratulations on that very incredible news, coming at a very opportune time for the ACC, as we've had this constant flux of change. So congratulations for that as well.
Well, thank you very much. A great credit to Commissioner Phillips and the board and everyone else that they worked with to get that across the finish line. Very exciting to know that we've got 11 or so more seasons on the football side and all the other sports, with great exposure opportunities on ABC, ESPN, and down the line with their full lineup of networks.
And if I may ask you this before we get into the heat of the schedule here, is you spoke about the fact of being over a decade at the ACC, working with John Swofford and now Jim Phillips. Just what you can say you've learned from their leadership, because obviously the leadership that they've had was an integral part of expanding this conference under John Swofford, expanding it again under Jim Phillips, and it's obviously affected you in the creation of the football schedule. So just what you can say about the leadership and the expansion amidst both of these leaders.
Well, both have expansion on their resume as commissioners of the ACC, so I think it's a credit to both of them for understanding the dynamics and the landscape that were unique to those particular points in time, evaluating the opportunities and doing what was in the best, long-term interests of the ACC. Both gentlemen have been and are terrific people and are great to work for and with. Both, give us at the staff level great autonomy to do our jobs. They set the boundary rules of what we're trying to accomplish, and then they trust us to do our work, which I think is what any employee would hope for out of a boss or a leader. And they're just really, really capable, both Commissioner Swofford and Phillips, at managing all of the relationships, throughout not just the conference but the industry. And so their communication skills and their relationship, their ability to relate, is top notch.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that, having been around both of these gentlemen and only having good experiences with both. More leadership. We look at this football conference and we look at essentially 17 teams because of the ACC's 18 members. Obviously, Notre Dame is independent. Of the 17 that you have, Fran Brown in his first season at Syracuse, a multi-award winner in his first year as a head coach in general and with Syracuse. Bill Belichick, a multi-Super Bowl champion and the North Carolina Tar Heels. And then with Manny Diaz coming back here last season and being at Miami and now being at Duke, the success that we see, the Dave Doran name at NC State as well, and just reaching really coast to coast at this point. Rhett Lashley, who I've known his entire time at SMU, and they just finished their first season, went into the college football playoff. When you look at all of these schools and you look at the leadership of these schools, just what you can say to the pedigree of coaches that we have in the ACC that are obviously going to be coaching throughout the schedule that you and I are going to be talking about. And I would like to give a nod to Dave Clawson because he spent so many years building up Wake Forest, so I'd be remiss if I didn't thank him for his work as well. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the coaches that make up this conference, because we talk about a conference of incredible coaches. We've seen the moniker with the ACC that it's the conference of quarterbacks and all the successful quarterbacks that we've had in history, including this past season, having the number 1 and number 2 yardage quarterbacks this season in Kyle McCord from Syracuse nationally and Cam Ward from Miami. So just what you can say to the pedigree of coaches that we have as we head into this season, and if you can make a note on Dave Clawson as well.
But I'm happy to. A lot of great points there, Dan. We were just with our head football coaches back on the 4th of February in a virtual meeting that we meet in the off season once a month, and it's certainly a fascinating group of Hollywood squares on the screen this season. Now so more than ever, it's a tremendous group of coaches, and we deal with them so much in the off season on what's best for the game, in addition to what's best for ACC football. So it's really neat to see how much they all care about the game and what's in the best interest. When the transfer portal window, when should it be? What's best for the game? What's best for the players? And the way they take a holistic view of things like that, as opposed to what's best for me at my school at this precise moment in time, which I think would be the wrong approach if you care about the game, and all 17 of ours, certainly do. We've been very active. We've been blessed, I should say, to have coaches who have been willing to be active. You mentioned Dave Clawson. He was on the board of trustees with AFCA, which is their constituent group nationally. Tony Elliott at Virginia has recently joined that group as well. Dave served for many years as the chair of our head football coaches as we have found our way through the last 3 or 4 years. Mac Brown, recently from North Carolina, certainly a national championship winning coach and highly respected nationally. But then the folks who come in, it's neat to see that one generation yields to the next, and they left things better than they found it. And then a really strong group of people come in to try to advance it even further. Fran, as you mentioned, has been terrific, to work with, and right out of a cannon, out of the gate with a 10-win season. And, looking back at the 24 season, we had 4 teams that won 10 games or more, which was the most of any season in the history of the ACC. We had 6 teams win 9 games, and that doesn't happen without excellent leadership, and not just at the head coaching position, but certainly there, but with athletic directors and presidents and chancellors, that the alignment that it takes this day and age more than ever on a campus to be successful in the sport of football at the Power 4 level. It's really difficult to put into words how true that need is. It's not just coach speak or business speak. That alignment is essential. But we've got a great group of 17 coaches. They're all great to deal with. Each of them have their unique styles and approaches, which makes those conversations fascinating and enlightening. And it's neat when you can get that group to consensus, which we often do.
And then there's this other guy, I don't know how many people are familiar with him, but Dabo Swinney, I believe is his name, from the Clemson Tigers. Just what it's like to work with him, because we see in today's world, coaches are moving all over the place. And I remember the story that he told that he came on the staff, was a wide receivers coach, took over as head coach, and he talked about how Clemson was going to compete and how they were going to win, and this belief that he had that they could be a national power, and that he got laughed at in those initial press conferences. And now he has been the representation for the ACC in the college football playoff multiple times and winning multiple championships. What is it like to work with Dabo day in and day out, knowing the faith that he has, the morals, the values, the culture, and he's kind of bucking the trend of the way things have been going in this chaotic NCAA environment right now? He's tried to remain true to his values. So just what it's like to work with him.
Well, first off, it's impossible not to give him, immense credit for the success that he's had and that they have had in building the program, the way that he thought it needed to be built. It's not arguable how successful they have been, and that they're one of the five most successful programs in the last decade, in college football, and how difficult it is to have sustained success
Yeah.
in college football. I don't think he or they get nearly enough credit for sustaining that level of success for such a long period of time. So he's obviously an outstanding coach and program leader and developer of young men, both on and off the field. He's a pleasure to work with. He and his staff. There's been a lot of consistency, with his staff, at the levels at all the different levels that we deal with, like chief of staff, football operations, not just OC, DC, but up and down the building. A lot of continuity, which makes it easier for people like us to deal with, because we've got a really good relationship with so many of them because they've been there so long, as have we. I respect them for how genuine they and he is. I mean, what you see on the screen in a post-game interview is his genuine self. He's not different in one setting than another. And so I think that's what I appreciate most about him, is how genuine he is, and to your point, how committed he is to his values. I think that's to be respected and commended.
And you've spent, like you said, over a decade inside of the ACC. I've spent over a decade covering the ACC. It feels different, in a good way, in my sense here. God, family, culture, morals, values, building relationships, consistency, like you said, longevity of coaches, longevity of staff members that are at the ACC. What does that say about this conference? Do you feel different? Do you feel like how you approach as a conference, unified, that you do exemplify those morals and those values? Because it says something about a business that retains people, that keeps people around, good people around, and continues to build with those people. So I've experienced it from my point of view. You're experiencing it all the time from the ACC office. Does it feel like a different conference? Do you feel that the ACC is still in this chaotic climate where so many things are changing? Do you feel like you've been able to remain yourselves and to put your values forward, your core values, and just what those may be, if you want to speak on those at all?
Certainly a fascinating question, and a deep question. I mean, I've worked here for 12 seasons, going into my 13th seasons. I've never worked in another conference. I came from Florida Citrus Sports, who runs a couple bowl games down in Orlando, the 9 years prior to my time at the ACC. But we certainly deal with a lot of business partners that interact with the other conferences, and we do hear quite a bit that the ACC is unique from the others. That's not to mean that we're better or than the others, but we do have a unique culture, which we are proud of. While we have changed quite a bit and done our best to adapt and keep up with the changing landscape, I think we are proud of our core values, and we want to be the best blend of athletics and academic success up and down the lineup. Every sport, every campus, year in and year out. And sometimes people like to mock that, but we don't care. We're proud of that. We want to develop people on and off the field. So we're proud of our annual success in the graduation report, in the U.S. News and World Report rankings of the quality of the academics at all 17 of our football institutions and all 18 ACC institutions. So we have tried very hard to not lose sight of the academic component of what is the fundamental underpinning of why we are here. We don't want to lose sight, under these changing times, that while yes, we're trying to make things right and better for the 1% of football players that will go on to play in the National Football League and have tremendous value in that space, we also care about the other 99% that they're playing non-professional sports at the highest level and this will be the end of their athletic career. And when they graduate, then what? We want them to be as fully prepared to be successful in life and their profession of choice as our football players who go on to the National Football League. We want them to be successful at that next stage of their career as well.
Yeah, that accomplished greatness that's behind you doesn't just stand for athlete, it stands for the thing in front of it at the ACC with student. We're here with Michael Strickland here, ACC Senior Associate Commissioner for Football, on creating this 2025-26 schedule. So getting into it, Friday night, we know the ACC is going to play on Friday, could be playing a couple of these games on Thursday, but our Friday night slate, some of the ones I'm looking at here, my hometown, Syracuse, will host Colgate on September 12th. We have a Florida State at Virginia game on September 26th. Louisville at Miami, always a good game, 4 days before my birthday, October 17th. And we have a Halloween game, North Carolina at Syracuse, with Bill Belichick coming to the Dome to face off against Fran Brown and the crew. Clemson at Louisville on November 14th. Florida State at NC State on November 21st. And, of course, we have Georgia Tech at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and that's on November 28th for a rivalry game. Just what you could say to these Friday night games and the North Carolina at Cal and Cal at Virginia Tech, which could be Thursday or Friday, the importance of playing on a Thursday or a Friday night for this conference.
Appreciate your point on the Friday nights. It's a point of emphasis for the ACC and in our relationship with ESPN. We think there's great opportunity and value for the ACC and our football programs on Friday night. We've done very well in recent years with some marquee games on Friday night. As you know, Saturdays are very busy from coast to coast, conference to conference. So anytime you can find an exclusive window to put your best foot forward, we think that's what we need to be doing. So we were more intentional this season than ever before on what type of matchups we put on Friday night. I think if you're comparing schedules from years past, this is probably the strongest slate, at least on paper, of games and matchups that we've ever scheduled for Friday nights. And the number, there's a roadmap for as many as 9 Friday night games, which I think would be the most in ACC history. Not an accident. It's very intentional. We think that's where there's growth and opportunity for the ACC and our relationship with ESPN, and to promote and expose our programs so they can put their best foot forward.
Yeah, and as we see that, we see our Friday, and like you said, 9 being a record for the ACC. If we see that this season for 2025-26 season here for football as well, the annual rivalries. And I wanted to get to something because this made your job interesting, and you have been a part, obviously, like you said, you're going into your 13th season, so you've been a part of the addition of Syracuse and Pitt, Louisville. You've been a part of the addition of SMU, Cal, and Stanford. Do you call John Swafford or Jim Phillips? Do you knock on their door and say, I just finally got the Rubik's Cube to work, and you added more? Now I got to find space to kind of integrate and put all this together. Do you ever kind of playfully joke and say, we figured it out, we had a model with 15, and now we got to go to, now we had a model with 14, now we got to go to 17. So how have you kind of handled the two moments here in the ACC where we have seen addition, because it's obviously affected the model? A couple of years ago, the ACC released a model of these are the games that each team is going to have. Every team is going to have 3 opponents every season, and then we're going to have the 3-5-5 rule. So we have the 3 opponents that are the same every year. And for Syracuse, it was Florida State, Pitt, and Boston College, for example. And then you're going to play 5 ACC schools. The next year, you're going to play the other 5 that you didn't play. And then that third year, you're going to play those 5 you played in year 1. Whoever was home will be away. Whoever's away will be home. And then year 2, you'll play those 5 in year 4. So if you play 4 years at a college, you're going to see every team twice, home and away. The 3-5-5 model and the doing away with divisions made a lot of sense, and I was excited to see it. And then you added 3 more schools. So how did you navigate through, we're getting rid of divisions, we're doing the 3-5-5, we're going to have these consistent opponents, and now you're trying to protect rivalries in an expansion that obviously affected putting all the schedules together?
It's been a wild journey. We meet with our athletic directors 3 times a year in person. We meet more often now than ever before virtually on a biweekly cadence. But those three, in-person meetings, since 2013 have always. It seems like everyone has always included a football scheduling discussion about what's best for the ACC, and often it was status quo. But I would tend to agree with you that 3-5-5 model was probably the best in terms of, but it was the best combination of math, the way the math worked out, and where everyone's appetite was at that time to finally, well, it took us a while to get the national support to get the flexibility to eliminate divisions. It was in the NCAA rule, it was always tied to your championship games. You had to have divisions in order to have the right to have a conference championship game.
Yeah.
And it took us a little bit longer than we hoped to get the other conferences to agree that we should relax that rule to give each conference more flexibility to handle their intra-conference scheduling rotation in a manner that fit them best and still have a conference championship game. So as soon as we finally had the right to make the change, we did make that change. So the 3-5-5, and that the playing every school once home and away in a 4-year career, I think that harkens back to your earlier point of questioning about the values of our conference. That was really important, that if you stayed 4 years, you had the chance to play everybody in the league once at home and once away.
Yeah.
But even that, we had some tough decisions that we still had to make. We couldn't account for all annual matchups that we really wanted to protect. There were a couple that didn't get accommodated, and we were to some degree criticized for that 1 year that it didn't happen. I think maybe Wake, NC State, and Virginia Tech, Miami didn't get protected. And fortunately for us, we got another bite at the apple a year later, to your point, when we further expanded. So that gave us another opportunity to reevaluate based upon the landscape, what's best for the ACC at this moment in time, and certainly expansion with the addition of Stanford, Cal, and SMU was absolutely in the best interest of the ACC. So then once you've got 17 teams, you convene that AD group again, a working group, and you go through your different model options, and you use math as a foundation for what you're trying to achieve to keep things as equitable as possible over a cycle. This math worked out to 7 years based upon some things we wanted to do to mitigate travel implications for East Coast teams headed west and vice versa. And then that informed how many times people played one another, either annually or not. And so that was a process to determine, okay, which games do we absolutely have to protect on an annual basis, and then which ones do we not. And I give our AD group a ton of credit on this most recent iteration, because they were as creative as they've ever been, in particular on the frequency of play issue. Some play one another 7 times in 7 years. Some play 5 times. Some play as few as twice.
Yeah.
And that gave us great flexibility, which was necessary in order to try to have as equitable and balanced a schedule as we possibly could with 17 teams. And so we wanted to have as much we needed as many games per team so that they could see as many people as possible over the course of time, and try to use historical strength ratings to try to keep the annual schedules as balanced as we can. I know you're eager to talk about the Syracuse schedule in 25 as a part of the 7-year rotation, but all of those factors went into that initiative to try to smooth things out for all teams over all 7 years.
Yeah, because to me, Syracuse had not hosted Miami, and the thing was, Syracuse over a decade is in the ACC going into last season. We're talking about 11 years, and they had only faced Miami one time in that time period, but they had faced Duke like back-to-back seasons, and they had only faced Miami at Miami. So last season became a massive, at least for me, being a kid and growing up with the Big East in Syracuse, Miami. When Miami left the Big East, arguably that move, when they went to the ACC, started the dissolving of Big East football. And that game played on Saturday, Saturday in November 2002, Saturday, November 30th, 2002, in the Dome. When they played this time around, which I thought was great with scheduling, Saturday, November 30th, 2024, it was 22 years to the exact day since they had last seen each other in the Dome. And you don't want to see something like that, obviously. And that was something that people were saying, like, there's schools inside of the ACC and they're in conference, but these schools are never seeing each other. The 3-5-5 model was going to make a lot of sense with that. Now I know you have to be unique because you have 17, so you can't abide by that model. But you talked about protecting annual rivalries, and I want to make note of these rivalries that we're protecting, because I know that Dave Clausen, I believe Dave Doran, were outspoken at ACC Kickoff of, we've been going over 100 years, NC State and Wake Forest, and we're not going to have it. And then the model obviously now allows for this to happen. And so this season, when we talk about annual rivalries, I'm just going to go down the line for the one that's coming up the soonest, to November 29th. September 11th, we get that game, NC State at Wake Forest. September 20th, we get NC State at Duke. October 4th, Miami at Florida State. October 4th, Boston College at Pitt. And then October 11th, Stanford at SMU. October 18th, Pitt at Syracuse. October 25th, Virginia at North Carolina. November 8th, Florida State at Clemson. November 22nd, we get Miami at Virginia Tech, Duke at North Carolina, Cal at Stanford, old Pac schools. And then on November 29th, we get 5. We get Boston College at Syracuse, SMU at Cal, North Carolina at NC State, Wake Forest at Duke, Virginia Tech at Virginia. Protecting this, like you said, we had what we had our history, we had a 3-5-5, and then there was a concern over games that could be lost, like NC State and Wake Forest. Having these annual rivalries now and working with the ADs and working with the coaches, working with the presidents and chancellors, do you feel like the list of annual rivalries that I read off, because we know Duke, North Carolina, and like Syracuse, Pitt, some of these were like, yeah, we expect to see them there in NC State and Wake Forest. Do you feel that this model and these annual rivalries now has everybody covered, including the new institutions?
Probably not. I think if we're being, totally honest with ourselves, or from an individual school perspective, I'll use Wake Forest as an example. I think they'd love to play North Carolina, on an annual basis. They've got Duke and NC State, I believe, to your point, but there just wasn't enough capacity to also accommodate, that matchup. So we don't. I don't think we bat 1,000. We're not perfect, and this schedule model is not perfect. So I think it's reflective, though, of how this conference comes together and compromises, and collaborates on what's best for the whole, and without having to worry about someone holding that up because they didn't get 100% of what they specifically wanted. So I don't think we're all the way there, and I'm not sure with the size of this conference or the conference, any conference under the current landscape. I'm not sure any conference can get all the way there, but we do a pretty good job of getting most of the way there. And again, with our enhanced flexibility, Wake Forest, North Carolina is able to play more than twice over the course of 7 years, and so that's where that extra flexibility was able to help. We made it better. When they were in opposite divisions, they played twice in 12 years, and that was really, distasteful for those two schools and those two fan bases, only an hour and a half apart. So we're in a better spot now than we ever have been. And the worst case scenario is you play everybody, twice in 7 years, which is still better than the twice in 12 years under the divisional format from a decade ago.
And I mean, SMU, their annual rivalries, they're in Dallas, Texas. They're the only school in this conference that is, right in the middle of the country. So they get Stanford and they get Cal. Cal and Stanford get each other. They're both in California. They were both in the Pac-12 together. So that makes sense. But how did you handle the SMU element of it? Because they don't have a geographical rival. They came in with the California schools, so they are put in these annual rivalry games with them. Is SMU happy with this? I mean, are they looking and saying, we wish we had maybe a Florida State or a Miami and we stay to the south here? How have you handled them? Because you have all of these Atlantic Coast teams, and you have the two Cal teams, and then here you have SMU sitting in Dallas, Texas, and you kind of have to create a place for them. So they have been put with the schools that they came in with. Does that make sense? Does it seem like those three are kind of going to always be with each other because of how they came in? Or how do you look at handling SMU because they're in such a unique spot?
Well, you asked, if they were satisfied with how it worked out. They went undefeated last year in the regular season in the conference, so I think they were pretty pleased with how the schedule worked out for them.
Sure.
All kidding aside, we those pairings were done in order to protect the travel issues on the back end of the schedule for, in particular, Stanford and Cal. Keep in mind, we have to be prepared for any two of our 17 teams to finish first or second and play in our football championship game the first Saturday in December in Charlotte, in Uptown Charlotte.
Yeah.
And so we Stanford and Cal also don't play their rivalry game historically on rivalry weekend. They play it the Saturday prior to what we traditionally call rivalry weekend, and protecting that date in week 13 in a 14-week season or week 12 of a 13-week season was important to Cal and Stanford. So, and we wanted to protect the history of that game because history and tradition matters a lot, to the culture of our conference, as we kind of touched on earlier. So knowing that Stanford Cal game wanted to be played the next to last week of the season, then you got to figure out, well, what happens with Stanford and Cal the final week of the season?
Yeah.
And the idea that either or both of them would travel to the East Coast, then go home, and then have to come right back to Charlotte to play a conference championship game was a dynamic that we didn't think, if it ever played out like that, would be fair to Stanford or Cal. So pairing them up with SMU allowed for us to prevent that from ever being possible. And Stanford's got flexibility based upon their historical scheduling relationship with Notre Dame to play a non-conference game that last week of the season, either half the time against Notre Dame and the other half against someone that they find. So last year they played San Jose State, because remember, with an odd number of teams, we have to have at least one team play a non-conference game every week of the season, or else someone will be off. And we don't want anybody off the last week of the season, because most years you only get one open date. So that was a scheduling, tool that we used to solve a couple of potential problems that we might have faced. And SMU's approach was, they've been great to work with. They were very flexible with their central location. There are a couple hours in flight either direction.
Yeah.
So they had a lot of flexibility in that regard, that they were nimble and could be used from a scheduling perspective in that flexible manner. Plus, they came in without any strong historical rivalries with any of the 14 members that they were joining, or with Stanford and Cal. So we didn't have anything that we had to protect. So we were able to use SMU as kind of a flex to help solve scheduling issues when we built the rotation of who played who how many times.
Yeah, and like you said, Rhett Lashley and the Mustangs definitely took care of business with this schedule coming into the ACC in year number one. Here with Michael Strickland on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora inside of the Great Lakes Honda City Studios, ACC Senior Associate Commissioner for Football, and we're speaking on the 2025-26 football schedule creation here, which Michael has his hands in every single season of over a decade now. Going into the season, I'm looking at these games that to me look like bowl games, look like, these just amazing, incredible opportunities to kick the season off. Literally in the Aflac kickoff game, we have two this year. We have Saturday, August 30th, and then we have Sunday, August 31st. We're going to see Syracuse and Tennessee, and we're going to see Virginia Tech and South Carolina in these ACC SEC matchups at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I saw this coming, and I said to myself, I'm at the national championship at Mercedes-Benz. I'm standing on the field, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and this is the end of 2024-25. When 2025-26 comes back and we start a whole new journey, the ACC is right where the national championship was just played. That's got to hold some weight, mean something to these players. So Syracuse, Tennessee, Virginia Tech, South Carolina in the Aflac kickoff games on August 30th and August 31st. And then also on Sunday, August 31st, we have Miami hosting Notre Dame at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami Gardens. So just looking at that end of August, where sometimes you're able to sneak in those games going into the season right before September, what it means to see Miami, Notre Dame, as well as Virginia Tech, South Carolina, and Syracuse, Tennessee, and the ACC being at the last stop of the College Football Playoff National Championship, that you can almost feel the weight of that when these teams step on the field at the end of August.
Week one has always been an important long weekend for the ACC. Many times we've played five days of ACC football. We want to play the toughest schedule we can possibly play. I think it's inarguable that that's what has happened over the course of the last decade, certainly the last several seasons. We are playing the toughest schedule of any conference in America. This coming season, I think 26 games against Power 4 opponents. We will play in neutral sites. We'll play on the road. We'll play any team, anytime, anywhere. And we want those opportunities on the field between the lines to try to play winning football. And so I give our schools a lot of credit that they continue to answer that bell. When this opportunity in particular in Atlanta presented itself to both Syracuse and Virginia Tech, they had the opportunity to say no thank you. But those are the types of games that those schools and those fans want to play in. It's where those coaches want to coach. It's where the players want to play. We're not shying away from anything, and you can't in football. If you shy away from challenges in football, you're going to lose. And so we run to it, not away from it. And so we're really excited in particular about how strong our week one is this year. You focused on the games in Atlanta and how neat it is from a symmetrical perspective. That's where the season ended this past year. We'll also end our season in Atlanta with Georgia Tech playing Georgia in that same stadium on a Friday, on Thanksgiving Friday. But we've also got Miami, Notre Dame in the stadium that will host next year's national championship game. We've got a number of on-campus games in week one with Alabama coming to Florida State and LSU at Clemson, among others. And then Monday night in our Monday night football slot with TCU headed to Chapel Hill. So no shortage of examples. I think 7 games against Power Fours in the first weekend. We want the attention and the spotlight on us out of the gate, and it's up to us to go in there and play winning football.
Yeah, and if I may ask this, obviously you're putting the ACC schedule together and, these conference matchups. But like you said, when it comes to Syracuse with Tennessee or Virginia Tech with South Carolina, they could have said no, and they chose to play these games. When it comes to that, how involved is the institution? When we look at non-conference scheduling, what is the dynamic between the ACC? Because you said as a conference, we're willing to play anybody, any day, any time. You want to have that, right? You want to build the portfolio. You want to leave no shadow of a doubt that when it comes to college football playoff time, not only your ACC champion should be in, but that you should have more than one spot, is what the ACC, I'm sure, is looking for, to have as much representation in the college football playoff as possible. So how much of it is the school, the institution, and how much of it is the ACC when it comes to non-conference? What is that dynamic like about putting it together? Because you want your teams to play the best of the best, but then you also said obviously they have some input. They can say, we don't want to play this game, we'd rather play this game. Mm-hmm. So what is that dynamic like when you're dealing with the institutions in non-conference?
It's a highly collaborative process, but back to your point, what one school in the ACC does can have a direct impact on another school. Last year was the first year of the 12-team playoff, and there's 3 conferences that were multi-bid leagues, and the ACC is one of them. That's our goal and our expectation on a go-forward basis and so intra-conference strength of schedule, and then what your 17 teams do with their out-of-conference slate can impact. We don't know who our 2 or 3 teams are going to be at the top of the standings at the end of the season, but they need the rest of their intra-conference peers to have done their part all along, so that whoever rises at the end has as strong a resume as possible. So we do work in conjunction with all 17 of our schools. I'm in touch with our football schedulers at each campus, daily on long-term future schedules. Who are you playing? Where are you playing them? What week are you playing them? So that what they choose to do serves the interests of their institution and the conference at the same time, and also we commit to scheduling opportunities in a way that helps us have as much flexibility to still build the annual conference schedule as easily as possible. So as I mentioned earlier, managing the number of games that we've got each week matters, particularly with an odd number of teams. We wouldn't want 16 teams to go schedule a non-conference game in week one in isolation, and then the one team who's left has nobody to play. That's a elementary explanation or example of why collaboration is important. We've got some general ground rules and expectations of how the schedule should unfold. Generally speaking, we expect our schools to play the 8 conference games, 2 Power 4 non-conference games, hopefully 1 home, 1 away. You've got 1 group of 5 / group of 6 opponent, and then we have 1 FCS game. So that 8-2-1-1 scheduling approach is generally speaking, what all 17 of our programs are striving to deliver on an annual basis.
And I'm going to look at Syracuse's schedule. I got some big picture stuff still here, and I appreciate you giving me an extensive look at this, not a couple minutes, Michael, because it means a lot to me to really break down. Because, last year I watched the release of the ACC football schedule. I broke it down on a live show as it was coming, but you're the man behind the music, and you're dealing with so many moving parts. And so I really do appreciate the fact that you're taking the time with me to really tell the story of the ACC and all of its member institutions. I do want to get to my hometown of Syracuse, and I want to know why you let this happen. So, but looking at Syracuse's schedule, they will face Tennessee, as we mentioned, Saturday, August 30th on neutral field. That'll be at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I'm looking forward to be at the Aflac kickoff game for both Syracuse, Tennessee, and Virginia Tech, South Carolina, by the grace of God. Peach Bowl Inc., Gary Stokin, Matt Garvey, and the team are incredible there. And overseeing the Aflac kickoff game, I'm excited for that. And I know that they always put on great events there at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So then Syracuse has UConn at home. They have Colgate at home. They're at Clemson, then Duke at home, then at SMU, then a bye week, then Pitt, then at Georgia Tech, then North Carolina, Bill Belichick comes in, then at Miami, then a bye, then at Notre Dame, and then Boston College at home for one of those rivalry games. So I'm grateful. I think the Syracuse fans are grateful that it's at Miami, take a break, then at Notre Dame. And I think that they're grateful that there's go up against Clemson on the road, then, Duke is still Duke, and then at SMU. But I just want to know, with all of these games this season, Syracuse didn't face Clemson last year, they didn't face SMU, and they didn't face Notre Dame out of conference. They did face Miami, so, going to Miami makes sense here. But when I was talking to fans about this, I said, they're not playing Clemson, SMU, Notre Dame, and Miami. They're playing all 4 of them on the road in one season. So why would you do this, Michael? But in all seriousness, I'd love to get the breakdown, because obviously it's going to be a very challenging schedule. Fran Brown doesn't shy away from challenge, nor does his student athletes and his staff. But this is going to be a potential gamut for Syracuse. And if they are to win this could be an electrifying season for Syracuse and for the ACC, because this gamut, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best, and they're definitely going to be challenged this year.
Well, it's a multifaceted answer as to kind of how this particular slate of games came to be for any team. With Syracuse being the exact example. So the Notre Dame rotation we actually set like 12 or 13 years ago.
Yeah.
So that was done over the course of we did 2 different sets of rotations that spanned over 12 years and 50 or 60 games, and everybody got 4 or 5 games, 2 home, 2 away, with 4 teams having that extra game based upon the way the math worked out with the equitable distribution of those games. So that was set long ago. The Tennessee neutral site game opportunities, I'm thrilled that you mentioned Gary and Matt and certainly David and the guys group in Atlanta. They are terrific to work with, and they care so much about the ACC. Gary in particular, being an NC State Wolfpack from his basketball days at NC State, always thinks of the ACC first when he has opportunities. And so he came to Syracuse and the ACC several years ago with this opportunity, and it was a good opportunity. So that decision was made. I'm fairly confident that was made long before we ever built this current scheduling rotation.
Yep.
And certainly Syracuse and Tennessee's programs were in different states. When they agreed to that series, they were in different states of their life cycle. Tennessee is certainly on an upswing right now from a cyclical nature, and so those things. And over the course of the last 10, 12 years, Notre Dame has been at different portions of their cycle. So it's just very difficult to predict when you go out there and add non-conference opponents, knowing that you want two A4 opponents each year. Very difficult to predict 10 years in advance which two to get, who to play at home, who to have on the road, and where they're going to each be in their life cycle. As it happens for Syracuse, they're picking two. They're getting 2 in 25 that are at darn near the peak of a cycle of the programs being very strong. So that's just a reflection of the timing and the way things worked out there. Regarding the ACC games, when we built, as we mentioned earlier, we built the 7-year rotation. We used a 10-year historical strength of schedule metric to try to distribute opponents, and we had some metrics that we evaluated, but we knew there were going to be there were some ups and some downs. And so I think you compared the 24 schedule to the 25, and I think your assessment is that maybe on paper, the 24 schedule was not as strong as the 25. But we knew, and I'm not going to argue with you over that. And so if you look at every team over the course of 7 years, I think it's fair to say that some years look like they're down and some years look like they're up from a historical perspective. We had no data that was reliable regarding SMU because they had not played, peer competition over the course of that decade. So we kind of put them in a neutral, number, so that it was at least evenly applied to all schools. Well, it turns out they come in their top 10 team and they're a playoff team. That was impossible to predict. And so that's just kind of the way that played out. You look at some historical strengths. I think you said that Syracuse, and I don't have it in front of me, they got Clemson, they've got SMU, and they've got Miami. I don't think they've got Louisville, do they?
No.
They don't have Louisville, and they don't have Florida State.
Right.
Over the course of a 10-year historical strength of schedule, both Louisville and Florida State are in the top 4 or 5 or 6 of relative historical strength in the ACC. So that's the trade-off. So SMU didn't have a metric associated with it. Clemson and Miami did. And so those two are also historically in the top 10, over the 10-year cycle in the top 4 or 5 as well. So 2 from the top 4 are on their schedule. 2 from the top 4 are not on their schedule. So that's just a real world example of how that played out. Obviously, SMU, Miami, and Clemson had great seasons last year. Louisville had a pretty good season as well. Florida State had a disappointing season. And so but 2 years ago, they were one of the 4 best teams in the country and should have been in the 14 playoff. So the inability to predict with great certainty each season when you're doing these things 7, 8, 9, 10 years in advance leaves open the possibility that something like this could happen from an on-paper perspective. But I would say it's great timing because now is the time in the history of college football to play that type of a schedule, because you can lose 2 games and still be in a path to win the national championship. You could go 9-3 with that schedule. You could probably go 9-3, and you're a playoff team. So there's a lot more margin for error for any team, but Syracuse in particular this year. You go 9-3, 10-2 against that schedule, you're going to feel pretty good about yourself. You've had a heck of a football season, and everything is there for the taking. If you do better than that, then, oh man, as you said, it could be electric for Syracuse fans.
Yeah, and I appreciate you breaking that down and taking a look at it and just seeing that, because I know that, to me, it's extremely exciting, and getting to know some of these coaches over time and just spending time with Marcus Freeman over these last couple weeks and seeing what he's done with Notre Dame has been tremendous. Now, the non-conference slate, which we've talked about a little bit here, the ACC in 2025-26 is going to put themselves in a lot of difficult situations from the outside looking in. But you said, we got to play these games. We want to play these games. So not including Virginia, NC State non-conference game in week 2, we have the ACC will play 26 games against peer Power 4 conference opponents and Notre Dame. 10 versus the SEC, 7 against the Big 12, 3 against the Big 10, 6 against Notre Dame, the most of any conference in the country. The ACC will also play 3 games against the Pac-12's Oregon State and Washington State. We will also see the ACC play 14 non-conference games against teams ranked in both the final 2024 college football playoff rankings as well as the 2024 Associated Press Top 25 poll, which is highlighted by 6 games versus national runner-up in Notre Dame and 1 each against top 10 teams Georgia and Tennessee. ACC will play 35 non-conference games against opponents that appeared in a bowl game this past season, including 8 against teams that made the 12-team college football playoff. That's a lot. That's definitely a challenge, and we're talking about simply non-conference in that respect. Michael, bring me into that. The fact that you are living by what you just told me. We will play anybody on any day, at any time, anywhere.
We're proud of that. In fact, I mentioned that coach's call we had just the other day, and that point again was made. We want to play these people. We want to play the best. Because we also think we're among the best, and we want to be able to demonstrate that on the field, not in the newspapers, not in headlines, not in articles and opinions, not in social media space. We want to play the games on the field and demonstrate that we deserve to have 4 teams ranked in the final ranking, to be one among the conferences that are a multi-bid league into the college football playoff. And the only way you do that is by playing good games and then winning games against those teams. And so you got to schedule them in the first place to have that opportunity, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
Yeah, and just to let people know of those Notre Dame games, we have August 31st, Notre Dame at Miami that I mentioned, and then we have October 11th, NC State at Notre Dame, November 1st, Notre Dame at Boston College, November 15th, Notre Dame at Pitt, November 22nd, Syracuse at Notre Dame, November 29th, Notre Dame at Stanford, and I would be remiss if I didn't shout out the fact that we're going to have some history in the ACC this year with those 3 new member institutions of SMU, Stanford, and Cal. They are in this rotation, like you said, in this model of looking years in advance of the fact that they're going to make history in games that have never been played before. Stanford at Virginia, Florida State at Stanford, Stanford at Miami, Virginia at California, and California at Louisville, so those games to be played. Any final point, Mr. Strickland, that you would like to make on this 2025-26 thing, outside of the fact that you can look into the camera and ask Jim Phillips for a raise?
The last comment I would have, I appreciate your time and your passion and coverage of the ACC. I just expect a wild scene on Halloween night in the Dome. On Friday night, ACC football and the ESPN Friday Night Football. 2 great teams, 2 electric and charismatic and captivating coaches, and a lot of good players on the football field. We expect a great scene out of the Cuse faithful.
Absolutely. Well, that coming from Michael Strickland, here of the ACC Senior Associate Commissioner for Football, on the creation of the ACC schedule and talking specifically about 2025-26. Michael, it has been my honor and my privilege. I can't believe it's over a decade that I've been connected to the ACC in some way, shape, or form. But I do want to say thank you. As time has flown, it's been because I've been in good company. So to you, to Amy, to Kevin, to everybody over the years, Mike, when I originally came in, as well as to Jim Phillips, John Swafford, I want to thank the ACC for giving me the open door, giving me the opportunity, and allowing me to have these conversations that a lot of people talk about amongst themselves but don't know. And I like to go to the heart of the source, but you can't do that if they're not open to do it. So thank you for being so open with your time and to providing answers to questions that a lot of people ask.
Well, thank you very much for those compliments. We look forward to seeing you down here in Charlotte in July for football kickoff, and it's been great to be with you today.